The most chilling letters from the beyond. Imagine a son writing a desperate letter to his dead father, not to say I miss you, but to beg him to stop the nightmares that are tormenting him. Or a widow, tangled up in legal trouble, who puts her faith not in a lawyer, but in her deceased husband to pull some strings in the court of the underworld. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. For thousands of years, people have written letters to their deceased loved ones, and they weren't just saying hello. These were urgent, practical, and sometimes terrifying pleas for help, sent to the only ones they believed could actually do something about it. The living had problems, and they fully expected the dead to solve them. Section 1. The First Ghost Mail. Our story starts in the shimmering heat of ancient Egypt, where the line between our world and the next was incredibly thin. For the Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't some far-off, disconnected paradise. It was an active realm running parallel to their own. The dead weren't really gone. They had just relocated to a different plane of existence, one where they still had power and influence over what happened on Earth. This belief gave rise to one of the most fascinating and personal forms of communication ever discovered: the letters to the dead. Dating all the way back to the Old Kingdom, around 2600 BC, these messages weren't sentimental keepsakes. They were serious, almost legally worded petitions with a very clear goal. People wrote them asking for help with all kinds of problems: family fights over inheritance, stubborn illnesses, infertility, and even for protection from evil spirits. The letters were written on whatever was available: pottery bowls, linen, papyrus, and even stone slabs, and then placed in tombs or chapels, often with food and drinks for the spirit of the deceased. The deal was simple. The living would provide for the dead, and in return, the dead were expected to act as powerful advocates. One of the most compelling examples is the Ku Bowl, a simple ceramic dish that holds a universe of family drama. On it, a man named Shepsi writes to his dead parents, his father on the inside of the bowl, his mother on the outside. The message is a desperate plea for them to step in and solve a property dispute that's threatening his entire livelihood. He reminds them of how well he treated them, basically making his case and insisting he's done nothing to deserve this bad luck. He's not just asking for a little comfort. He's demanding supernatural legal aid from the highest court he can think to appeal to. Another letter, found on a jar stand, has a man asking his dead father and grandmother for a healthy son. He was convinced that his wife's health problems were being caused by two troublemaking maidservants. So he wasn't just asking for a child. He was asking his dead relatives to intervene in a domestic squabble that he believed had supernatural roots. These letters show us a world where the dead weren't just remembered, but were actively involved in daily life, seen as powerful go-betweens who could talk to the gods and change events on Earth. This wasn't just a quirky belief. It was a practical part of life and death. Section 2. The Angry and the Restless. But the relationship between the living and the dead in ancient Egypt wasn't always so cooperative. Sometimes, the letters got dark and accusatory. The living believed that a restless or unhappy spirit could be the direct cause of all their problems. If your crops failed, your child got sick, or a business deal fell through, it was entirely possible a disgruntled ancestor was to blame. The letters from this time often read like a bizarre mix of a heartfelt plea and a legal complaint. The writer would carefully list all the ways they had been a good child, spouse, or sibling. They'd list every offering they'd made, every ritual they'd performed, all the respect they'd shown. This was their evidence, proof that they had held up their end of the bargain. The question, sometimes unspoken and sometimes shouted, was, "I've done everything right, so why are you letting this happen to me?" One gut-wrenching letter was written by a widower to his dead wife, Ankiri. He's clearly falling apart, not just from grief, but from a string of bad luck he's sure she's causing from the great beyond. He writes, "What wicked thing have I done to you? What have I done to you that I should have landed in this wretched state I am in?" He then goes down a list of all the ways he was a good husband, how he never took another wife and always provided for her. It's a desperate, almost prosecutorial appeal. He's essentially threatening her, hinting that if she doesn't stop tormenting him, he will file a formal complaint against her in the underworld's divine court. This really shows a key part of their belief system. The dead were not all powerful or automatically good. They could be moody, forgetful, or even mean. They had to be reminded of their duties. In another case, a man named Henny wrote to his dead father, Meru, begging for a break from constant nightmares. He believed the bad dreams were being caused by the ghost of a servant who had been wronged. He wasn't asking for comfort. He was asking his dad to step in and be a spiritual bodyguard, to fight off this malevolent spirit in the afterlife. These weren't letters of sweet remembrance. They were letters of desperation, a last-ditch attempt to reason with, and sometimes threaten, the powerful and unpredictable dead. Before we jump forward in time to an era of gas lamps, shadowy parlors, and a totally new kind of letter from the beyond, take a quick moment to subscribe. We explore the strange, forgotten corners of history every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming up. Section 3. The Victorian Spirit Scribes. Thousands of years after the last hieroglyphs were carved into an Egyptian bowl, the urge to talk to the dead exploded all over again. But this time in the drawing rooms and seance parlors of Victorian England and America. The 19th century was an age of incredible scientific progress, but also an era of deep, widespread loss from wars and disease. This created the perfect breeding ground for spiritualism, a movement built on the belief that the souls of the dead could and wanted to talk to the living. Suddenly it seemed like everyone, from Queen Victoria herself to the creator of Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was obsessed with the idea of piercing the veil. While things like table rapping and levitation were all the rage, one of the most fascinating methods of spirit communication was automatic writing. A medium, often in a trance, would hold a pen to paper and supposedly allow a spirit to guide their hand, churning out messages from the other side. What they wrote could be anything from bits of poetry and weird symbols to detailed, coherent letters. The practice took off like a rocket. It was a much quicker way to get messages than having a spirit tap out the entire alphabet. A special device called a planchette, a little heart-shaped board on wheels with a hole for a pencil, was even invented in Paris in 1853 to make it easier. The idea was that the medium, especially women who were thought to be more passive vessels, could be briefly possessed by a spirit who would then write out their thoughts. One of the most famous cases involved Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself. After his son died, Doyle's belief in spiritualism became much more intense. His wife, Jean, who was a medium, claimed she received a letter from Doyle's own mother through automatic writing. But this very letter created a huge rift in Doyle's friendship with the great magician Harry Houdini. Houdini, who made a career out of exposing fake mediums, pointed out a massive flaw. The letter was written in perfect English, but Houdini's Hungarian mother could barely speak the language. Despite all the hoaxes and debunkings, for many people these letters were profound proof of life after death. They offered comfort and a feeling of connection in a world filled with grief. Unlike the ancient Egyptians who wrote to the dead with specific demands, the Victorians were desperate to hear from them, looking for reassurance that their loved ones were okay. The letters they received were often filled with messages of love and descriptions of a beautiful, peaceful spirit world. Section 4. The Ghost in the Machine. The phenomenon of channeling letters from the dead didn't stop with the Victorians. It just evolved, taking on new forms in the 20th and 21st centuries. In Brazil, a man named Chico Xavier became one of the most famous mediums in history, practically a national icon. Using what he called psychography, or automatic writing, he published over 400 books, which sold more than 25 million copies. And he claimed every single word was dictated to him by spirits. But maybe his most incredible work was the more than 10,000 personal letters he channeled from the deceased to their grieving families. Heartbroken mothers would travel all across Brazil just to see him, hoping for a message from a lost child. The letters he produced were often shockingly specific, filled with intimate details, private jokes, and even handwriting that family members swore was identical to their dead relatives. Skeptics were often won over by just how personal and accurate the messages were. Xavier's letters became so credible that they were even used as evidence in a court of law. In one famous case from 1979, a young man was on trial for murdering his best friend. The boy swore the gun had gone off by accident. While the trial was happening, the victim's parents went to see Xavier, desperate for some kind of comfort. A letter eventually arrived, channeled by Xavier but supposedly from their dead son. In it, the spirit confirmed that his death was, in fact, a tragic accident. The letter, with its familiar handwriting and personal details, was admitted as evidence, and the boy was acquitted. Today, the practice of writing to the dead is still very much alive, though usually in a more therapeutic way. Grief counselors and psychologists often suggest that people write letters to their lost loved ones as a way to process their feelings. It's a way to say the things that were left unsaid, to express anger or regret, and to find some sense of closure. People might save the letters in a memory box, burn them in a symbolic act of release, or even create a special email address to send them to. It's a deeply personal ritual that helps people hold on to a connection and navigate the overwhelming landscape of grief. From ancient Egyptians demanding justice from their ancestors to Victorian widows just wanting a sign from the spirit world, the act of writing to the dead is a powerful thread that runs through all of human history. These letters are so much more than just historical oddities or spooky stories. They're intimate windows into the universal human need for connection, for justice, and for a little reassurance when we're facing the ultimate unknown. They show us that whether the message is carved in stone, channeled through a medium's pen, or typed into a digital void, the hope that someone is listening on the other side is a hope that never truly dies. We still write, not knowing for sure if our words will ever be read, but finding some kind of peace just in the act of sending them into the beyond.